Hey there YouTube, welcome back. So in this video I'm going to be taking apart the trigger group for that Stevens 77C shotgun that I've been working on. The main reason that I want to take it apart is because the finish on the trigger guard is in pretty bad shape. As you can see, a lot of the original paint has been worn off. What I'd like to do is repaint it with that VHT roll bar and chassis paint I was talking about earlier. And while we have it all apart, I can also give it a thorough cleaning and just figure out how everything works and make sure it's working properly. Alright, so we'll get started here. So as I said before, there's a lot of parts on this trigger group that just kind of sit loosely, and when you go to take it out of the receiver, like little bits and pieces are probably going to fall off of it and stuff like that. So just be mindful of that when you're working with it. So this is the slide lock release lever. So you can see it engages with the slide lock right there. And it basically just sits on this little pivot point. The only thing that holds it in place once it's in the gun is basically the receiver. So you can just pull it off. And then the slide lock release spring basically fits into a little hole in the trigger guard right here, and it basically hooks in on the other side on the slide lock on this post. There's a little groove right there for it to sit in, and it goes underneath the post. So you can just pull it off with your fingernail. Okay, here's your spring. So next you can take off the slide lock. So the slide lock just sits on this pivot point right here. Pull it off, slide it out, and that's it. There's your slide lock. So the next thing you can take out now is the hammer. So it's held in by this little bushing right here, and when it's not cocked, there's almost no pressure on it, so you can actually just push it in and out with your finger. It just kind of sits there. So you pop it out. Here's the bushing. It has a little hole in the center, so when it's fully assembled and inside the receiver, the trigger group pin that helps hold in the whole trigger group actually slides through that little hole. And here's your hammer. Okay. So next is the lifter, this thing right here. So basically what happens is when the slide is all the way forward, pushes down on this lifter pawl right here, which is spring loaded, pushes, so what happens is it's pushing up on the lifter at the same time it's pushing down on the cartridge stop, so it's allowing a new cartridge into the loading area, and then it pushes up the lifter like that. So when you pull the slide forward again, it's actually so the bolt is able to engage that new cartridge and basically just push it into the chamber. Okay, and the lifter is held in by these two little screws on each side. It's easy enough to take out. So this little lifter pawl is held in with rivets, and the spring as well for it. So I'm not going to be removing that, and there's really no reason to remove it unless the spring were broken, and if that were the case, I'd be taking it to a gunsmith. I wouldn't be doing this myself. Okay, so now you can take a little screwdriver and pop out the lifter spring right here. It just sits in a small hole in the trigger guard right there. And there's your spring. So now we're down to the sear and the trigger and the safety. So the sear holds on to the hammer when it's cocked, when the hammer is all the way back. And then when you pull the trigger, the sear trip underneath pushes the sear back and eventually releases the hammer, just like that. You can also remove, there's the mainspring for the hammer and the hammer plunger right there, just drops out, and they can be separated. Easy peasy. So to remove the sear, we take the sear out first. This pin holds in the sear, and it's under almost no pressure most of the time, so you can actually just push it out. You don't need a hammer. So there's the pin. Set that aside. Now you can remove the sear and the spring, and that's it. Okay. So there is a sear adjustment spring here as well. If it weren't working properly for whatever reason, you can adjust this screw right here, and I think it basically just limits the travel of the sear spring if you tighten it. It's been set at the manufacturer, I can tell, because there's a little groove in the side right there that the slot's lined up with, so I'm not touching that. So now it's time to remove the trigger. So the trigger is held in by an adjustment screw and a pin. So I'm going to take out the pin first. Then we'll remove the spring, or sorry, the adjustment screw. Don't even really need the screwdriver to take it out. And hopefully you can see what the trigger adjustment spring looks like. It's a little screw here, and it has a pointed end. So now you can just pop the trigger out, lift it. So the trigger has the sear trip on it. It's built in and it's riveted on. So again, that's not something we're going to be removing. We don't have to. You can clean it without removing it. And just to show you how that works, so that sear trip engages with the sear on this little groove right there. So that's how they fit together. So when you pull the trigger, you're basically pulling the sear back as you pull the trigger, and then that releases the hammer. So now we're just down to the safety, and that is the trickiest part. So if you look on the left side of the trigger guard, you're going to see, if you push it in, there's a little plunger right here that holds in the safety. It's spring loaded. Use care and caution when you are removing and putting this back in, because if you put pressure on it and then accidentally release it somehow, that tiny little plunger is going to go flying, and you're going to spend half your weekend trying to find it again. I guarantee it. I might even end up sending it flying just now as I take the safety out, but we'll see how good I am. So take a small, very small flat screwdriver, also being careful about how sharp the screwdriver is, because if you accidentally goes flying, then you can scratch the paint on the trigger guard as well. So use care, press down on the plunger and push on the safety. it's out. So there's your safety. And then if I can get the spring out, there, I can just show you quickly. There's the tiny little plunger and the little spring for the safety. Okay? So now we're down to a bare trigger guard. Perfect for cleaning and refinishing now. So now that we've done that, I'm going to show you how to put it all back together. So again, this is the trickiest part. Take the safety and the little plunger and put them together, or sorry, the spring and the plunger. Put it back where it belongs. Oops. Okay. Put in the safety with the 2-groove side facing towards the plunger. Now, here comes the fun part. I'm going to show you the trick to doing this. You basically just want to get it started. Okay? Get it into the first groove. Don't worry about if it goes all the way in, because it's probably not going to for you anyway. And then I'll show you what to do. It's not quite in the first groove there. We're almost there. Actually, it might be. I'm going to try this. So the trick is that once you get that plunger over the first groove, it basically pushes the safety out of alignment, so it's very hard to get it over the second groove. So really all you have to do is take your finger, your thumb, realign the safety, and then push on it. And it should pop right back in. And it is. There we go. Perfect. I didn't even send it flying that time. What do you know? Alright, so now we're ready to get back to the rest of it. First I'll put the trigger back in. And we'll start by getting the pin in there. Okay. Right. Then you can get the trigger adjustment screw in there. Don't crank it all the way in, just screw it in part way to start with. That's good enough. So now you can get the sear back in. Make sure that groove is underneath the sear trip, and then you can just push in the pin. Didn't quite get that lined up properly. There. See, it's working. Okay, so now this trigger adjustment screw, if it's in too tight, you won't be able to operate the safety. So what I do is I tighten it up until I can't use the safety anymore. Okay, back it off half a turn. Okay, and the manufacturer has actually put a little cutout right beside the groove of this trigger adjustment screw, so I guess the best thing to do is to line up the slot with that groove once you've got it adjusted, and it should never have to move. So trigger and sear work freely, safety works freely. That's exactly where it needs to be. Alright, so next we can put the lifter back in. We'll actually put the spring back first. Get it into that little hole. Oops. That. Now before you tighten up the other screw on the other side, put the hammer, the mainspring, and the mainspring plunger back in, because it'll be easier to do it before you tighten up the lifter. Okay, so we'll put those back in there. Good. And then we're going to put back the hammer. So the hammer faces with this tab backwards. It sits on the plunger. And also keep in mind too, this little post is where the slide lock spring sits when you put that back. Okay, we'll slide that bushing back in. Now your slide lock, again, slide lock fits on that little post on the hammer, the spring I mean, and you just push it down onto the pivot point. Away you go. Now we'll put the slide lock release spring back in. Goes in this little hole in the trigger guard right beside the bushing. And you can pretty much just take your fingernail, pop it onto the groove on the post of the slide lock, and that's it. And then your slide lock release lever fits right there, and as I said, it just sits there. Oops. And there you have it. That's your Stevens 77 trigger group completely disassembled and reassembled. I hope this was a useful video, and thanks for watching. We'll be back with some more restoration once I get around to doing some stripping and some painting.